Hi, everyone. Welcome to our April 2024 webinar here at Sporesight. Got a lineup of some of the questions we've received recently in our emails and phone calls with some of you inspectors. So thought these were good candidates to put into a webinar like this and disseminate that information out to the group of inspectors. So there'll be plenty of time for questions. If your exact questions aren't answered, feel free to type in the chat and I'll answer some as we go along. I'll also have time at the end for questions as well. So give people another maybe 30 seconds or a minute to jump in, and then we'll get started. As always, record these. You'll get an email at some point after this webinar, most likely tomorrow, with a link to it if you want to look back. We also put them on our website and our YouTube channel, so you can come back, and if you forget something we talked about or the specific answer, you can look back and get those anytime in the future. So again, feel free to type your questions in the chat, and I'll answer some questions as we go along if they come in, and there's also some time at the end. So I see just a few people joining here last minute before we get started. We'll just go ahead and jump right in. Welcome. This is your first time. I see some new names on the attendance list this month. So this is your first webinar. Thanks for joining us. Be 30 minutes. Nice, quick, little lesson and questions. Get those answered for you. So a little bit about us just to start. I'm the presenter. My name is Dylan McIntosh. I'm the lab director here at Sporesight, also the product group manager. Been here for 2 years. It'll be 3 years next month, just about 3 years. A certified industrial hygienist. I've done all sorts of mold and indoor air quality and other industrial hygiene work in my career. I'm also a PAACB certified spore analyst. Our company, Sporesight, is the name of our environmental product. TechSight is the name of our company. We're truly a software company that operates a laboratory. We're founded in 2013. We're leaders in machine learning, artificial intelligence, utilizing computer vision, digital microscopy. We're focused on air, liquids, and smear mold diagnostics. There's other companies that do other types of tests. That's really where we're focused, and we're used by laboratories, pathologists, vets, doctors, people all over the world. We've got 3 different verticals. Our environmental is Sporesight. Our human medical is TechSight, a company brand. There we have a great collaboration with Mayo Clinic as well as some other large names in the human health space. And then our animal, our veterinary product is white labeled by Zoetis, which is a world's largest animal health provider, and it's branded as VetScan Imagist. So we operate a laboratory. We're able to receive any samples from the United States. We're a licensed Texas mold analysis laboratory. It's the only state that requires a license. We're AHA NPAT participant. And then as well as myself, I'm a certified spore analyst. So we have a commitment to you guys. We want to make your lives easier. We want to give you solid product that you can add on to your home inspection services and give your clients a great ancillary service that gives them more information, a great screening tool for mold and indoor air quality concerns. We're really focused on giving you a really good report and really solid service, and we're continuing, always trying to improve on that. These webinars are just part of that. So we'll kind of just jump in from there. So again, theme of this month is questions from our inbox. We talk to a lot of home inspectors, get a lot of emails, phone calls, etc. And you guys ask a lot of really good questions. And we've done one of these webinars in the past. This is the second time we've done a question from the inbox, and we'll probably do another one in the future as we get more good questions. So again, if your question isn't answered, we'll I can cover it here, or maybe in the next one we'll elaborate further. So we'll get started here. First question: can my customers or friends order from Sporesight and do their testing themselves? So our product, we're really designed to be used by a professional inspector. We are a business to business provider. We're not direct to consumer or DIY. So if your friend or your customer is a home inspector or environmental professional, certainly they could sign up with Sporesight and do some testing themselves. But if they're a general consumer, general public, a DIYer, Sporesight is not the best solution for them. Now, there are some DIY kits out there that you could direct them to, such as Got Mold. They are really focused on the direct-to-consumer DIYer market, where we are really designed for professional inspectors. I think I see a chat here. In the future, will bacteria air testing be available? So that's an interesting question. To answer that really briefly, unless not in the sense of how spore traps are done. Bacteria is cultured. It's not a direct examination. So when you do bacterial testing, you have to culture that on a petri dish or similar culture material, and you grow it under different conditions, different growth materials to identify and differentiate the bacteria. That process isn't really one that adapts itself to a software-focused analysis like Sporesight does. I won't say it's not possible, because 10 years ago, no one thought what we're doing today would be possible, but not in the immediate future. Bacterial testing is also pretty specific. You typically want to have an idea of the types of bacteria you're interested in. Airborne bacterial testing is even more specific than that. So it's probably not a test that a general home inspector would typically be equipped to handle. Those would be much more specific environmental professionals, industrial hygienists, etc., because it's a pretty advanced type of test to be able to determine your target organisms, how to collect the sample, where to collect the sample. So it's a little different. And bacteria itself is, like I said, it's culturable. It's much smaller than mold spores. So it's done just a different way. Now, there is probably the more likely scenario would be testing that's genetic in nature, PCR type test or next gen sequencing type test. And that's something that we probably wouldn't be looking to add ourselves, but other labs could offer that. So on to the next question. Does the sampling media expire? Can I use it past the expiration date? Now, of the supplies that we sell and we receive, some of them do have expiration dates. I've got some cassettes here on my desk. Aerosol cassette here that this one expired in March of 2024. I think this other one is the same. So some media does have expiration dates printed on them, such as aerosol cassettes or Allergenco cassettes. And the expiration there is the gel media, the adhesive can dry out and desiccate and be less efficient to collection. There are other expiration dates on things like swabs and tapes. Occasionally, sometimes there's not, sometimes there is. It's best practice as a professional inspector to only use media that is not been expired. It is within its expiration cycle. Now, if you're in a pinch and you absolutely have no other option, using something that's been expired, I've used cassettes in testing. Now, this is anecdotal and not anything very scientific, but I've used cassettes that are months past date and been able to effectively collect and analyze them. But like I said, they're probably not as efficient capture on an expired cassette than a fresh cassette. It's usually best to keep an eye on those things and only use cassettes or other sampling supplies that have not expired. Um, that's certainly, just like if you're operating a professional kitchen, you probably want to make sure your ingredients aren't expired. Same here. You want to make sure you're keeping on top of those things and making sure that what you have is good. And that goes with, you don't want to order too many at once because they do expire, and you don't want to be sitting on a bunch of cassettes that have expired. If we bought the media from you and it expired, will you exchange them for free? Uh, Unfortunately, no. If, for instance, if we somehow provided you expired media, absolutely, that's a mistake on our part. We have really careful ordering to make sure that we only maintain and stock fresh cassettes and that they don't age on the shelf. We get them out pretty quickly. So if that were to happen, we certainly would make that right. But it's on you as an inspector to make sure that your cassettes that you've ordered don't sit on the shelf too long, and you don't order too many for your velocity. Typically, those cassettes have anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half, depending on manufacturer of them. So it's not a short term. Usually, you've got a number of months to use them before they expire. That's a good question. Let's move on to our next prepared question here. I've submitted air samples, but the report does not include an at-a-glance page with summary graphs. Why? So if you're on this call and you're familiar with our report, you know that the very first page after the cover page is the at-a-glance, or the summary page, to have those colored graphs that give you a brief interpretation of if there's an elevation of mold on any of those air samples. And if you don't see that graph, the most common issue is you didn't provide an outdoor air sample. In order for us to give you an interpretation, we need to have that provided outdoor air sample. And that is really important because we need to have that comparison with that reference or that control sample to know what may be abnormal. Now, there is always a possibility that there is a mistake, whether on our part or your part, and that can be corrected. So perhaps you did send us an outdoor air sample, and that graph is not showing up. It could be that if you used our app and submitted the job, you may have accidentally listed that one as an indoor air sample instead of outdoor. So our system doesn't register it as being an outdoor air sample. It's a really easy fix. You can do that in a matter of moments and issue a revised report. And then if that was a mistake on our end, doing data entry from the samples, maybe you didn't use the app, you sent us a chain of custody form. That can happen where, for example, sometimes people don't write outdoors or outside for the sample. They might say something like porch, and maybe our team just didn't recognize that as an outdoor air sample and put it in as an indoor air sample. Or sometimes mistakes happen, and we can address that and correct those pretty easily. So just reach out to our support team, and we can regenerate a revised report, usually within 10 or 15 minutes. Inspector question number 4. This is this very specific question. If anyone is familiar with the Allergenco D Positrack cassettes, it's these long rectangular style cassette that have a microscope slide inside of them. The barcode on these are a little different, where on like an aerosol cassette, we've got a serial number there and a barcode right on the outside, really easy to see, easy to read. You're not going to mix that up. But on these cassettes, that barcode is actually printed on the glass inside of the cassette. So if you're looking at it from the top, you'll see a barcode there. And there can be some confusion here because for some reason, they put a phone number right there next to the barcode. And we've had it happen where people write that phone number down thinking it's a serial number. And you don't recognize that you've wrote the same sample number 3 times because you've got a lot of things going on in an inspection. It's very easy to mistake that. So if you use these cassettes, it's a little tip that the serial number is on the bottom, and that there is a 1-800 number. You want to be wary and not write that down, but write the serial number down on the bottom. And then another little tip here is it's really hard to see these things. You want to hold them up to a dark background, because it's a printed blue, and then the other is transparent. So it's not two colors. It's a blue and it's a clear. So if you hold it to a dark background, it can make that a little easier to read. We get this question, or some form of this question, quite a lot. The bacteria question was a version of this where, do you test for other contaminants such as VOCs, formaldehyde, asbestos, bacteria, etc.? So this time, we are focused on providing you with the best possible analysis for these spore trap cassettes for air samples and surface samples for mold. Our report does include other contaminants as well, things like skin cells, carbon carbon particulate, fibers, hair, etc. But regulated particulate like asbestos or silica, or other materials like lead or chemical vapors, VOCs, formaldehyde, etc. Those tests have very specific sampling and analysis requirements that aren't quite the same as collecting it on a spore trap cassette. So at this time, we don't offer those analysis services. We're really focused just on providing you with solid mold analysis. In the future, it's possible, but they would be a separate style test. You wouldn't be able to take one cassette and have it analyzed for all those things, just because every one of those types of analytes require different media or different method for both the collection and analysis. Another prepared question, from where do the sample labels in the report come from? When you get our report, you'll see on the at a glance page or the tables with the data that's sent out, where do those labels come from? They come directly from the chain of custody, whether it's through the app or written out. And this is really important that you take care when you enter these things in, because we will put them into the system as they appear on the app or on the chain of custody form. So making sure you're spelling, you're not using shorthand or abbreviations for things that you'd want spelled out in the report. That's really critical, because as we receive it in the app or on the chain of custody form is how we enter it in. So on the app, capitalization, proper spelling, and not using shorthand notation or acronyms or other things are pretty critical. And then writing on the chain of custody form, making sure you're using clear handwriting, legible handwriting, because sometimes we have to make the best guess to what you wrote on that if your handwriting isn't top form, and sometimes we may be wrong and we got to recreate the report. Again, not a big deal if for whatever reason you misspelled or put the or we misinterpreted your handwriting. We can make those corrections pretty quick. We get questions about the types of mold that are on a report quite a lot, and there's a lot of mold types that we report on, over 30. So you want to know more about the type that is found in the report. Do you have a resource for this? So there's a number of places you could search the web to find a lot of different fungal libraries or glossaries or information. So we've prepared our own. It's on our website here, sporesite.com/fungal glossary. You can access it also from the Pro Resources tab on our website. There's pictures and a little description about each class that we report on, if you want to get a little more information. If you need even more information for that, a Google search or looking at other laboratories, fungal libraries are also a good idea. There's some out there that have huge databases with tons of information, way beyond what we've prepared, if you really want to know the next level type information. So I've got a question here from an inspector on the call. At a building where samples are taken, on the outside test, the front of the house has no trees, but the backyard has trees. Which area do you prefer for the outside test? That's a great question. Um, Ultimately, there's not there's no right answer on this. You could justify it in a number of ways, and some people would even justify it by saying you should take one in the front, one at the back, or one in the windward, one at the leeward. Um, so there's not a best answer for situations like this. Realistically, outside, it's probably not going to be much different from the front to the back. So either would be acceptable as long as you're um, collecting samples, proper flow rate, proper duration. You want to be 10, 15 feet at minimum away from the structure, set up on a tripod or set up off the ground. Um, those are the principles you want to follow. Whether it's in the front or the back, um, could be justified either way. And you can always collect more than one outdoor air sample. Now, there is a limit because budget is typically pretty high priority uh, for your clients. Not very often in my career, I've had someone say, take as many samples as you see fit, use your judgment. There is no budget. I want it to be absolutely exactly what you would suggest. That's not very common. We very, very rarely have clients like that, if ever. So there is a budget consideration. So not every time will you take two outdoor air samples, um, but you could justify it that way because there may be a difference. Most likely, probably not. Um, Again, not a one right answer in that situation, um, just because you can justify it either way. Here's another one. This is very similar to question number 6. Do you report on mycotoxins or do you analyze mycotoxins? So mycotoxins themselves are a chemical compound that are produced by some microorganisms, including some mold types. Um, so these are chemical compounds. So in order to identify chemical compounds, you need some sort of assay or analysis that's detecting those compounds. And our spore trap and surface samples, we're doing what's called a direct read. We're not doing any chemical analysis on these things to identify those compounds. So we don't analyze and report mycotoxins themselves. We do report on fungi that are potentially toxigenic. So we're identifying the structures, the spores, the hyphae, the candidiophores if they appear of potentially toxigenic mold. We're not measuring the toxins directly. There are some labs who do. Generally speaking, that test is fairly expensive. And then interpretation is really hard to do because there's not a good resource or guideline for airborne or surface contamination of mycotoxins. There's not a good resource that says this is high, this is low. You kind of just have a result, and it can be really difficult to say is this a problem or is it not, because you don't have that frame of reference. But that testing is available from some very specialized labs. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I've got 2 questions left and then some time for questions and answers. So this is a big one that we get a lot. How do I present the results of a slight elevation to my clients? So if you've seen our report, the yellow in the graph, the middle section is a slight elevation. And this is the hardest part. Just like in many other aspects of life, black and white are very easy to define. If there's no issue, easy, no detected elevation. If there's a very major issue, that's also easy. It's clear that there's a problem here. But when the results are in the middle, the gray area, it can be hard to interpret that and it can be hard to communicate that. So us as a lab, we don't have the full picture, the full context, right? Like you may have, or maybe you don't have the full context and you need to refer them out to a specialized environmental professional for a more detailed inspection. But there can be situations where a slight indication, you could say, hey, we've got a slight indication. We found surface samples that were positive, and we've got water damage in the bathroom. So I think, in my opinion, that there is a, a serious potential for a mold issue here. So that could be potential. Those sorts of contexts that you may have or other inspectors may have at the property may be able to directly confirm a mold issue on a slight elevation. But more often than not, this is a reason to dig deeper or to look closer, have a more specialized inspection if there's a concern with the mold, a more detailed purpose moisture and mold inspection that may be able to uncover potential hidden things that you weren't able to find in your inspection, or it may provide the opposite. It may say those slight results were an anomaly, which can happen. There is a possibility that just natural changes and effects made a slight elevation where when someone came out a couple days later and did a more detailed check, ruled it out as a potential. So slight is very hard. It's a gray area. And most often, this would be a time where you would refer your clients to have a environmental professional, someone whose core business and core expertise is doing very detailed assessments if there's a concern there. So last question, how does sampling time impact the spore counts in the report? So a little background here is our reports, the unit that we report on are spores per cubic meter of air. So if you think of it, all those microscopic mold spores, that count of 500 is in 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. In that much air, there's that many spores. Longer sampling times, which equal to larger sample volumes, that provides a test that's more sensitive. You have a lower limit of detection. So the longer that you sample for, the more sensitive a test can be. But there is a very delicate balance that you need to strike there because a sample that is too long, you can risk overloading the cassette. And if you've been on one of these past webinars, you may have heard me talk about that, where the risk of overloading the cassette, where the sample may be so overloaded it can't even be analyzed, or even marginally overloaded, there can be a bias that makes the results potentially underreported. There's a real risk there. So you want to make sure that you're choosing the most appropriate sample duration for the environment. Most often in my career, in a residential setting, in a home that people are living in, a 75-liter sample or a 5-minute sample at 15 liters per minute is my recommended sample. Longer than that, it's not very difficult to overload a cassette. It can happen very easily at 10 minutes or 15 minutes. So typically, that's what I recommend. That's even what most of the cassette manufacturers recommend for a high traffic residential type setting. Clean office setting, medical facility, you'd sample for longer because the cleanliness and housekeeping is typically much higher, and the amount of activity in those are not as high as a home. So the longer the sample, the more sensitive, but you can't overload the cassette. So that wraps up our prepared questions. We've got 1 minute, but we can stick around for a little longer if a couple questions come through. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat. If something comes to you later, send us an email, drop us a message through our website, and we can get you a response to your questions after the fact. And then, yeah, if a week or two go by and you've got a question, you may have it answered in front of everybody. in the next Q&A webinar. So I'll give people just a few more moments if they're thinking of questions. I'll jump ahead to our proposed topic for next month, a little sneak peek. So we've got potential webinar next month where we're going to discuss some new sampling cassettes that we've been helping design and collaborate with one of our partners that we use for human and veterinary supplies to design a cassette improvement over the existing cassettes on the market. A question just came in. Can you smell mold without inhaling spores? So it's a bit of to answer this question, it's going to sound like I'm splitting hairs, but almost every breath that you take on this planet, you're going to be inhaling mold spores. It's just the way it is. There's mold all around us in the air at all times. What I think the question is when you smell that musty, that damp, moldy smell, for the lack of a better term, can you smell that without there being an elevated level of spores in the air? And the answer to that is yes. What you're smelling, that odor, that mold spore, that moldy, musty odor, are actual chemical compounds that microbes give off during their just regular life cycle, similar to human body odor. It's a similar process that they give these things off, just a byproduct. And it could be that you can smell this musty odor. Smell it may be coming from something that's not mold at all, bacteria, yeast, etc. So it is possible, but most often every breath you take will have some mold spores in it. Can someone get sick from mold without inhaling spores? The reason I ask is somebody smells something or they're concerned, shouldn't I be able to pick up mold spores in the air? Yeah, you can get sick without inhaling mold spores. The most probable source or route of exposure to mold that's going to be enough dose to make someone ill isn't respiration at all. It'd be ingestion. So if you eat or either on purpose or accidentally ingest mold spores through your digestive tract, you've got a much higher dose than respiration. You can even have dermal skin contact. Some people who are sensitive can just develop issues through contact. But as I said before, if you smell that musty, moldy, damp smell, I've been able to smell that and not pick up elevated levels of spores in air samples. That doesn't mean there's not a problem. It may be a problem that's hidden deeper inside of a wall that's not causing an elevated level of spores to make it out, but those chemical vapors, those gases that I talked about just a moment ago, those could be entering the space. The microbial VOCs could be entering the space, but the spores themselves may be a normal level. And it may be a compound that's given off by something that's not mold at all. Bacteria or yeast also give off those odors. What is a better way to advertise the service so people will want to take advantage of it? I will refer you. We've got a webinar. I think it was our third webinar that we had with one of our early adopters, where we go over ways that you can get better uptake on these tests. But just listing that you offer mold testing is a big one. Listing out what ancillary services you have, proposing it to clients either initially or on the job site when you have reason to think they may benefit from it. Those are ways that you could get more uptake. But I'd check out that webinar if you haven't already. So I've got enough for maybe one more question, and I've got two very similar questions in the queue, so I think I can answer them similar. This is about taking multiple outdoor air samples. So talking about what's your opinion, or when should you take multiple? So it's a professional judgment that you'll have to make. And one of these questions says, I take at least 2 for an average home, sometimes 4 or more for huge houses. Um, and then the other one talks about, a apartment complex or a large commercial property. Do you suggest more outside tests? So I'd say I don't know if I've been in a home where 4 outdoor air samples makes sense. Obviously, if it's in the budget, more data isn't going to be a bad thing. Um, but the budget is really what it comes down to. I've taken 4 outdoor air samples when I've tested in a huge warehouse where this is half a square mile almost of of enclosed space, just huge warehouse where it feels like that you're in a different area code on one end of the building to the next. And I've taken multiple in those situations, definitely. More than 2, one on each end of the building. Um, so it's a professional judgment thing. Some standards of practice say always take 2. Some say 1 is sufficient. Um, if it's in the budget, taking 2 is a great strategy. Windward and leeward. So those are the often the way people suggest taking 2. You could take more. You could take, you know, 1 on each aspect of the house, northeast, southwest, or uh, 1 on each side. Those certainly are not bad ideas. To me, it comes down to budget most of the times, and could that extra sample, if you're on a limited budget, could that extra sample be more good from the indoors? If your choice is, do I test a sample in this damp basement and in this potentially water damaged bedroom or bathroom, or do I use one of those samples to take an extra outdoor air sample? Most of the time, that decision is gonna lean to the indoor air sample um, because of budgetary concerns. Unlimited budget, certainly, yeah. Take 2, take 4. You don't want to go overboard because you're going to realize that those samples most likely are going to be pretty similar in makeup and in concentration, but um, it kind of just depends on those specifics, and there's some judgment there. Always take at least 1. If you've got the budget for more, that's good, but always at least 1. Don't skip out on outdoor air sample and take none, because then your interpretation is really limited. So I think that wraps us up for this month's webinar. Um, Thanks for all your questions. If you have any other questions, drop us a line, send us a message through our website or to our sales team. If you've got more questions, we're happy to answer them behind the scenes, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. So thanks for joining us, and have a good evening.